Hello and welcome to Mirror Modal Dev. Today we are going to talk about MCP servers, and I know there's a lot of talk out there right now about the difference between whether or not we need MCP or whether skills are enough and all of that, but right now we're going to focus on MCP because we're still using them all the time and maybe we will continue to do so. And one of the challenges for platform providers when creating MCP servers is that they have to build all of these different integrations with all the different systems. And I found myself recently trying to set up MCP servers for Codex when actually Codex was not supported by that platform provider. So just to give you like an example here, you can see I've been playing around here with the brand new Buffer GraphQL API. So Buffer is a service that lets you connect to all of your social accounts out there, and they provide a nice sort of single interface for social creators to use in order to broadcast out to the different networks. And they have this brand new API, and you can use that to automate some of your own personal workflows for social media. And so I've been playing around with it, and I looked on the integrations page here and noticed that they have integrations for Zapier, Claude, MCP, just kind of generically, Cursor, and so on. Well, I happen to use ChatGPT Codex, and you'll see here that it says that it's coming soon. So there's, if I click through this, I can go and sign up on a form, and that's cool. I already did that, so I'm waiting for access. But in the meantime, this doesn't necessarily mean that I can't get anything done with their MCP server. I'm just going to have to do a bit more manual setup. And Buffer is not the only API I've needed to do this for. I've also done the same thing for Valtown recently. And so given that anytime it seems someone's going to build an MCP server, then they may have to build out like 8 to 10 different integrations. There's always going to be a chance that maybe when I want to get something set up, that specific integration is not yet built. And so instead of waiting around, I wanted to see if I could get it set up. I did that. I've done it again, both for Valtown and for Buffer, and I wanted to show you how to do it as well. So that's what we're going to look at today. Generally speaking, and every doc set is going to be different, but probably what you want to do is look in their generic MCP setup, whatever that guide might be. So in Buffer, it's going to be this one here that just says MCP, and then it'll give me some instructions. So it tells me that I should get the API key, and they conveniently provide it right here for me, which is great. And then I should go configure my MCP client. So we're going to have a look at how to get all of that done. But just to kind of give us something to follow along with, I thought I would pull up a nice little mind map here, as we tend to do on Mirror Modal Dev. And so this is where we are in the first step, right? We're going to get the info. And I just showed you, sometimes it's going to be straightforward in the docs like Buffer makes it, and other times you'll need to read between the lines. But I think if we follow along today, you'll be able to kind of understand the concepts enough to know where you're supposed to be looking. So in addition to that, then we're going to look at ways to put the key, the API key, into our local environment or wherever our developer environment is. And there are a couple of ways to do it. The way that you might be thinking about might work, but I find a different sort of more locally scoped way of working with those API keys to be better for me. I'll show you how to do that too. After that, then we'll just configure the MCP client. And again, I'm going to be using Codex, so whatever you're using, it might be different, and that's okay. Probably the basics are going to apply. You'll need to read between the lines and apply that to your situation. And then lastly, we'll just give it a try. So first of all, let's just go into, we'll do get the info, and this one's straightforward enough. So, whoops, this one is straightforward enough. So all we got to do is get the API key and get the server URL. We already did that. So we'll go back into the docs here for Buffer, and let's say I've already copied this over, and then I can grab this URL here, and then you can see here we're eventually going to build this authorization header with the API key that I got from Buffer. So let's just consider this step done. Again, how you go about getting your API key is going to differ depending on the platform, but generally speaking, you're going to be somewhere in a developer dashboard getting that configured. So all we're doing now is we've copied two pieces of information, the API key and the MCP client server. So next up, We'll go back into our mind map. And now this is the part where, surprisingly enough, this is just plain old Unix stuff. And we're going to have to think through what's the right situation for you on how you want to set this up for your personal environment. So basically, you've got two options, which is global. You can have your API key available across your entire system on your Mac or your Windows PC or whatever it might be, or you can scope it to repo level. And so let's just say, for example, this is probably the first one that most of us are going to be used to, which is like throwing things into like a Z shell RC file or a bash RC file, or I don't know if you use fish or whatever shell you use. There's probably a config file somewhere and you already have some things set up. Like when you instantiate a new shell, there's some scripts that run, or maybe there are some environment variables that you're already putting into that environment. This is one way to do it. Probably not the way that I tend to like to operate if I can avoid it, just because, especially if I have agents running on my machine somewhere, now anywhere an agent happens to be, they're going to be able to see that credential. And there might be situations where, sure, if I'm working on the buffer integration in a given repo, that's great. I want it to have access to that credential, but what if I'm off like building something totally different? You know, if I'm off and I'm building my own application, and do I really need to pollute the space for that agent working with me in my own application with these API keys that aren't relevant? In some ways, it's more information than necessary, and in others, it's potentially dangerous. So I like to scope it down if I can, and I'll show you how to do that. So if we were going to push it down to the repo level, probably a few ways to do this, but the way I've been doing it is working with a package called dir-env. So we're going to have a look at that right now over here on this tab. So this is dir-env at dir-env.net, and the point of this is just to show you the page, but we're not going to read through it. The whole idea is this gives you a package that lets you create files, like config files, at arbitrary directory levels in your system, and then you can add different variables and stuff that are only available when your shell is at that level of the system. So we'll have a look at what that means, but that's the general gist. But before we dive into that, let's just say that we need to, our first couple of steps here are going to be to install dir-env and then hook it into the shell. So just to do the basic config, I'll show you how that works, although I won't run through it live, simply because, one, how you install it, it's going to depend on your machine. I'm on a Mac, I'll be using Homebrew. If you are on a Linux machine, or you have different preferences for even on the Mac, like how to install things, then you're going to do it differently. But either way, if you did want to do it with Homebrew, you'd go down and find the installation documentation. And then over here on this page, you can see there's a nice list of all the places you can grab these different this package from different package managers. I'm going to use macOS Homebrew. So if I click over to this is going to look very familiar to anyone who uses Homebrew, but just grab the command up here, brew install dir-env. So I would just have this and then put it into my terminal like that. Now I happen to already have it installed, so we don't have to sit here and watch it install, which is great, but we can look at, for example, which dir-env, and you can see that I've already installed it via Homebrew. So that's what that's going to look like once you've got it installed. And again, where it installs and all of that depends on your package manager. So next up, we said that there was a step there back in the docs that is all about hooking it into your shell. Installing it alone isn't going to do anything for you. It's just that's now more files on your file system, but you actually want to have it doing stuff. So in order to hook it into your shell, again, it's going to depend on your shell. dir-env has a nice page here that'll guide you on how to do this depending on which shell you use. So there's a setup for bash, there's a setup for Z shell. If you use Oh My Z shell, then there's a plugin that you can use, and so on and so forth, all the way down. So lots of different ways to get that set up. For me, I have in my Z shell RC file, I use this line right here, and that's all I need. So I just add that to the end of my RC file, and I'm off to the races. So once you've added that, now you have installed dir-env and you've hooked it into your shell. So we can move on to the next step. And this is the part that now we get to actually start using the package. So I'm going to do this kind of outside of the scope of what we might actually look at with buffer in just a moment. But let's just say, for example, I wanted to make a new directory, and we'll call it, well, we'll just call it env. So we're going to do take env. That's a Z shell shortcut. It just makes a directory and CDs you into it. So anyways, now I'm here. And anytime I want to have a repo scoped API key or environment variable, what I'm going to do is create a new file at that level called envrc. envrc. So it's going to be, make sure it's, since this is a dot file, you need the dot at the beginning. So go ahead and make that. You're going to get this thing, immediate error that looks kind of scary. Don't worry about it yet. What we're going to do next is we'll add something into it. And for now, we're not going to add an API key, but let's just add an environment variable to prove to ourselves that this works. So now that we're in there, I'm going to open up the .envrc file, and we'll do export hello, and then we'll do world, save that, and then let's take a look at this error real quick. What this is saying is that that envrc file is blocked by default unless you enable it. So this is just I suppose like a security measure, just to make sure that you absolutely intended for those environment variables to be loaded into the environment. So this is just the package looking out for you. But of course, we just made that. We know what's in there, and we trust it. So we're going to do dir-env allow as the message suggests, and we're good. So now you can see, since we happen to be in this directory, it loaded this envrc file. And it shows that it has access to an environment variable called hello. And so let's just see if we can get it to oops. Cool. So we can get it to echo that environment variable. You know, we just assigned the variable hello to the string world. So when we say echo, we get back that content. Pretty simple stuff, right? So now let's just have a look to see, okay, why did we go through all of that trouble? Well, the cool thing is that now if I go back up a level, you can see that dir-env just automatically unloaded for us. And what does that mean? Well, if we go back through and we try to echo that same environment variable, you can see Z shell is trying to autocorrect for me because it doesn't immediately have access to that hello variable. So it's wondering, was there something else you were trying to type? My Z shell plugin assumed that hello was actually meant to be shell. Great, but that wasn't what it was. So anyways, we went ahead and ran echo hello just as I intended to, and you can see nothing came back. So if we go back into that environment one more time, you can see dir-env is again doing the job of loading the envrc file and then putting that hello variable into the environment. And once again, if we do this, now we have access to it again. Okay, so why is this interesting? Well, a few reasons. I already mentioned one. One, if I stick my API key at the very top of my entire shell environment, then that API key is always there for every shell I'm running. This is in some ways like when we talk about in JavaScript polluting the global scope, there's a little bit of that, right? Now we could have potential conflicts with API key naming if we needed more than one API or environment variable with that name. But there's also just, again, the potential for agents running on your machine to now see things that maybe they shouldn't see. The other thing that is a bit more sort of user, let's say like has more like user utility is the following. If you need an environment variable that has the same name but has a different value in different contexts, then this direnv package is also going to help you with that. So let's just say, for example, right now we're in this env directory and we have this hello variable assigned to the string world. Well, what if that's an API key and actually that API key world is for my personal account on Buffer? So we're going back to the context of Buffer for just a second here. Maybe I have social media accounts that are my personal ones, and then I have some that are my work ones. Well, those API keys are going to be different, but probably I don't want to juggle a bunch of different API key names and have all of them available at any time and just kind of have to hope I picked the right one. So instead, what we can do is at these directory levels. So right now we have env. So we're going to go up a level and we are going to change env. We're going to rename it and we're just going to call it env personal. And then we'll do one more, which is going to be env work. And then inside of here, we're going to make a new .envrc file so we can put another environment variable in this directory. And then we're going to do this. We will add an environment variable here. So we're going to export hello once again. And then that is going to equal, I don't know, we'll go with moon. So let me save that. And then of course this is a new directory with a new envrc file. direnv is looking out for us by checking to make sure that we actually want to let that load dynamically from here on out. And we do. So we're going to type in this command again, direnv allow, and you'll see it loaded it up. And then if we do echo here, it's going to echo moon, right? Now you can see where I'm going with this, because if I cd back up and we go back, you can see that that environment variable was unloaded. And then we go into personal. And this envrc file is blocked, so we're going to allow it. And then we're going to echo once again, hello, and you can see here it's world. So what we just accomplished was having the same environment variable name, but depending on the directory we're in, its value is different. And so with strings like this, whatever, you can, that's not a big deal. But like the idea is that now I can have, for example, API keys that have the same environment variable name, but with different values depending on if it's my work buffer account or my personal buffer account. And so this is another great reason why you might want to do things this way. It does add a bit more setup, as you can see. It's not just stashing a string inside of your global shell config, but at the same time, it gives you a lot more flexibility and a bit more protection from the agents and from yourself. So anyways, this is how I have things set up. If you do go the global route, great, that's cool. But I suggest giving this a try. It feels a little bit weird at first if you haven't done it, but once you get used to it, it feels kind of quite convenient, actually. So, okay, cool. We were on the path to setting up an MCP client when the provider doesn't directly support that integration. So the next thing we're going to do is actually, now we have the ability we have all of our credentials and information here. We have a way to set API keys in the environment. So in this case, let's just say that we had set up, instead of hello world, it's an API key. So we've assigned that API key. If we echoed hello, it would be a long API key string. So that's just our API key now. Now we need to go in and configure the MCP client. Before we get started with this, once again, this is going to be highly situational depending on how you do it. I run Codex, so I'm going to show you how to do it on Codex, but every agent probably is going to have a different way of doing it, and we're going to do this for Codex in the command line specifically. So even there, Codex may have some variations depending on what manifestation of it you're using. So anyways, let's jump into that. And it's really, for all of that sort of preamble, it's fairly simple setup. So if we, go into looking just at Codex for a second, like the CLI, we can get help for MCP just by typing that in. And if I scroll up, we'll see here that this is just a command that lets us manage external MCP servers for Codex. It gives us a list of subcommands, including list, get, add, remove, like all the things you might expect. And then just a few options and flags and stuff like that. So let's just say, for example, if I wanted to go in and then do Codex MCP add, this should give me an error because I haven't passed in all the necessary flags, right? What am I trying to set up? What am I trying to add? And so depending on what you're doing, your command is going to be a little bit different. But in this case, we would have essentially put together like a command like this. So we could do Codex MCP add, and then we'd do URL and pass in that URL from the buffer documentation. So we'll click back over and look here in the documentation, and they have a server URL. So anytime you're manually setting up an MCP, you're going to have some sort of server URL like this, and then we would paste it into here. And then the other thing we would need to do is pass in our API key as well. And so what I want to do is actually quit out of this for just a second and look at a real example that I've used in the recent past. Cool. So this is a full example of a command that I've done in the recent past. And why don't we I'll bring this over for a second to the mind map so we can kind of explode what we are looking at a bit. So this is the command. So what are we looking at here? First of all, there's just the base command, MCP, so Codex MCP add, and then from there, we will do a few things. I'm going to really split this out. First of all, we're giving the MCP a name. So in this case, I'm naming it buffer, which is pretty obvious, right? Let's just give it the name of the thing that it is. And then from there, there's a few more things that we can add. So first up, we pass in this URL flag. And that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? So we just pass in, the thing that we just pulled from the buffer docs is just a URL. Simple enough. And then the last piece of this is passing in the API key. So I'm going to stretch this out, see if I can get it on one line. There we go. Okay, so passing this like really crazy looking flag here, right? It's just bearer token in var. So what we're saying is I don't want to pass in the API key directly into the MCP or the agent CLI. And instead, I'm going to say, hey, agent, grab that from the shell environment. And so we can have it look here for an environment variable called buffer underscore API underscore key. So if we were doing it in this example that we've kind of been going with, which is quite contrived, then we would have it look for this instead. And of course, the way we have it set up right now is depending on which directory you're in, that's going to end up resolving to either worlds or moon. So again, this could be my personal API key for buffer and then my work API key for buffer. So anyways, you would end up running that. And I've already run it for my local setup. So what I want to do is actually show you this actually working in practice. So you can kind of get a real sense for what it feels like. And so I'm going to move over into a new or another directory where I've already got this set up. Okay, and here we are. So I'm in a directory called buffer on my machine, and I have 3 directories here: ash, collection, and other. Other we can ignore, it's just other stuff. But ash is obviously my personal stuff, and then collection is an application I build for vinyl record collectors. And each one of those have social media accounts associated with them. And I want to be able to use the MCP to work with the Buffer API when I'm building out automations. So let's have a quick look. We'll CD into Ash, and what we would expect is that dir-env has loaded in my Buffer API key. So remember, I'd set up an envrc file at this level in this directory, and then when we CD'd into it, it loaded in this API key that I set in that file. And so now we can open up Codex. And I'm just going to open up Codex here in the CLI, and we'll have a look at what it loads. We should expect that it's going to just kind of load up a standard chat interface, and we'll see a little bit of complaining from it because I'll have at least one MCP that won't load precisely because I have this setup. So you'll see my Valtown API key isn't loading here because we're not in an environment where dir-env can find that variable and inject it into the shell environment. So, but we're here to talk about Buffer, and in this case, and so I want to see, for example, let's just ask, and let's talk to it instead. What can you tell me about the Buffer API? And so we'll expect it to hopefully grab the MCP, and you can kind of see it starting to do that. It's looking at the schema. So Buffer ships a GraphQL schema alongside the MCP, or inside it with the MCP. So you get a ton of context, which is really cool. And then it comes back and it says, hey, here's a bunch of stuff you can do with it. Very cool. Wow, it has a lot to say. Okay, cool. So we got a lot of information there, which is great. Okay, so the next thing. What channels do I currently have connected? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because before I asked it some pretty basic MCP question, which is basically almost like read the docs, if you will. In this case, I've asked it something that's very specific to me, and that's where that API key comes into play, because now it's got to have a credential so it can learn about my account. And so you can see here it's saying you have 2 connected channels in my organization. There's ashryan.io on Instagram and ashryan.io on Threads. Okay, cool. And both are connected. So that's what we would hope to see. And then from here, if I was planning on building something or reasoning about something I've already built or whatever it might be, you can see that we can do that, and it's going to be able to run as me. Now, let's find out if we can achieve the same thing with the other directory that we talked about a second ago. So you'll remember that here in the Buffer directory, I had 3 directories, one of which we don't care about, but we have Ash, and the other one is collection. So let's try to go into collection and see if the same thing will happen, because we've set up the MCP or with environment variables that are injected when we CD in through dir-env. So it's a mouthful, but when we go in here, you can see, again, I have a .envrc file here, and it pulled in the same API key name, which is really nice. But it's problematic if that API key is pointing to my personal account. Let's hope it's not. So we're going to go back into Codex. Again, it's not going to find the Valtown API key, which is exactly what we want. And instead, we're going to ask it about what accounts are connected in this context. Tell me what channels I have connected through Buffer. So again, it's going to go through, and you can see it called get account. It's listing my channels. And it comes back and it says you currently have 2 connected Buffer channels in collection. You have your Instagram one, which is collection.connection, and you have a Threads profile, which is, again, collection.connection. So again, that's exactly what is expected. So this is really cool, because if you kind of come back to why we started talking about this at all, first of all, at the outset, when we were looking at the docs, it looked like what we wanted to do was coming soon, right? We wanted to be able to run the Buffer MCP in a OpenAI ChatGPT or Codex context, and that's not available here yet. So we could wait, Or we go to the standard MCP setup and we configure it ourselves. And so that's what we did. We went in and we've got the credentials from the buffer docs or the buffer dashboard. And then we set up dir-env because we knew that we're going to have a couple of different accounts on buffer that we want to juggle back and forth with. And instead of putting them all up at the top level of our shell and kind of polluting that context, running risk of agents kind of running wild when they don't need to know that information, and also giving us the ability to kind of go back and forth between, in this example, work and personal. We can do all of that with the dir-env package. And so we got all of that set up. And then after that, it's just as simple as you add the MCP to your coding agent, however that happens to work. We looked at how to do it in OpenAI Codex, but of course, it'd be something similar either way. We passed in the URL of the MCP server, and then we passed in the credential. But instead of directly passing in the credential, we said, hey, look at this environment variable instead. And since that environment variable has a common name in each one of those repo layers, depending on the place, we don't have to do any logic about swapping names out, like environment variable names. The environment variable name is always buffer API key, but depending on where that MCP was loaded, it's going to get a different value. And therefore, we can just talk to the bot and it reads through the MCP using that token that it reads in. It has that contextual information that we would expect. Oh, I'm in my work directory. I would expect to be able to connect through buffer through my work account, and same thing for personal. So that's how we got that all set up. And I can say that, like, as much as we focused on buffer in this situation, this isn't unique to buffer whatsoever. You've seen, again, when I load Codex here in the terminal, because we're in a buffer directory where I did not set an environment variable for Valtown, Codex will complain, and that's okay. It just warns me that's not a problem, but that's actually exactly what I want to have happen. We're not working with Valtown in this directory, so why have the API key available at all? Now, I do have another directory somewhere where I work with Valtown quite a bit, and when I'm in that directory, it loads the Valtown variables, but maybe it doesn't load the buffer stuff because I just don't need it. So anyways, this is a great way to kind of get set up, get yourself unlocked. You don't have to wait on the platform provider to go through and find your specific MCP client and set that up for you. And instead, you can just kind of, roll your own, if you will, and just kind of configure it manually. Eventually, who knows, like maybe we'll find that there's kind of just a common, simple way to for everyone to support these things out of the box. But the nice thing is if you kind of know these few little tricks, it's just going to work out for you anyways. So let me know what you end up doing with this information, if it's helpful at all. I'm curious to see what other APIs this actually applies to at the moment. I've only given you 2 examples so far. Again, there's Buffer, which is a brand new API, and Valtown. And I happen to know Valtown seems to be working on direct support for Codex at the moment. But in the meantime, I don't have to wait on that. So that's quite nice. And eventually when there is direct support, then I can migrate over and get that sort of advantage of a little less manual ergonomics. But in the meantime, I can still build. So hopefully this is useful to you, and I would love to know what you're doing with your MCP servers, whether you're still using MCP servers or if everything is skills now. I'm kind of somewhere in that middle land at the moment, but let me know if you have any questions, and feel free to post anything you're working on. I'd love to see it. Thanks for following along with Mere Mortal Dev. See you next time.